The carriage wheels crunched on gravel, a sound like grinding teeth in the estate's vast silence. Lady Eleanor Vance pressed her gloved hand against the cold window, watching Sterling Manor's silhouette grow larger. Its dark stone walls rose against the bruised sky. A scent of damp earth and neglect clung to the air. The carriage felt heavy, stale, a suffocating blanket that mirrored the weight in her chest. Each turn of the wheel pulled her deeper into this new life, chosen not by love, but by desperate necessity. Her breath hitched. She had envisioned this moment often during the long journey from her ruined home, the Vance estate. That proud house stood in disrepair, its windows boarded, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Her fingers locked around the worn leather strap, its rough texture a small comfort against her despair. The sterling gates, iron giants with fierce gargoyles, groaned open. They swallowed the carriage, ushering her into a grand, desolate dominion. A shiver, not from cold, traced her spine. This place, with its high ceilings and heavy drapes, was meant to be her home. It felt like an elaborate tomb for the living. She remembered her father's study, filled with books and pipe tobacco, a smell of security. Now, the faint aroma of old wood in the carriage, combined with the manor's sterile chill, felt like an erasure of those memories. She needed to be strong. She needed to remember her purpose. This marriage was not an end, but a weapon forged from her family's humiliation. The carriage stopped before the manor's massive oak doors. No fanfare, no welcoming party. A lone footman, his face a mask of indifference, opened her door. The absence of warmth confirmed Eleanor's fears and bolstered her resolve. She stepped out. Her simple, dark green traveling gown contrasted with the opulence she now faced. The gravel beneath her thin boots felt sharp. Her gaze swept the facade, noting intricate carvings and heavy leaded glass. The place whispered of centuries of power, of hidden corners and forgotten histories. Here she would find the truth. Here she would exact her justice. A silent promise solidified within her, cold as the autumn air. Inside, the grand entrance hall stretched before her. Shadows clung to the ornate cornices. Her boots tapped softly on the polished marble floor, the sound echoing hollowly. Mrs. Agnes Finch, the manor's housekeeper, stepped forward. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back. Her dark dress blended into the shadows. "Welcome, Lady Eleanor," Mrs. Finch said. Her voice was gentle, yet held a lifetime of authority within these walls. "Duke Alaric awaits you in the drawing room." Eleanor offered a polite nod. Her lips felt stiff. She felt Mrs. Finch's subtle scrutiny. A faint scent of lavender from the housekeeper felt out of place in the cold hall. Eleanor's gloved hands felt cold, a physical chill permeating her being. She followed Mrs. Finch through dimly lit corridors. Heavy tapestries of hunting scenes adorned the walls, their colors muted by time. A scent of old parchment and cold stone clung to everything, a testament to the manor's age. Eleanor kept her gaze steady, her posture erect. She was not merely a bride, she was an infiltrator, an avenging ghost veiled in silk. They reached the drawing room. It was a vast chamber with dark wood and muted fabrics. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across portraits on the walls. The air here was warmer, carrying the scent of burning logs and a distant hint of pipe tobacco. Duke Alaric Sterling stood by the mantelpiece, his back to the door, gazing into the flames. His tall figure was impeccably dressed. As the door opened, he turned slowly, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Eleanor. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cool, appraising look. His sharp features, framed by dark hair, conveyed self-assured pride. He was a man of command. Eleanor could almost taste his arrogance. Her heart gave a small beat, but her expression remained blank. "Lady Eleanor," his voice was commanding, articulate, devoid of genuine welcome. It was a formality. "You are here." "Duke Alaric," she replied, her voice measured. She felt a stiffness in her jaw, suppressing a tremor. A coldness emanated from him, seeping into her bones despite the fire. He gestured vaguely towards a settee, indicating she should sit. He did not move toward her. This was a transaction, not a meeting of spouses. Eleanor moved with grace, choosing a high-backed armchair. Its rich velvet felt cool against her skin. A servant entered with a silver tea set. The clink of cups was loud in the quiet room. The scent of black tea and lemon filled the air. Alaric watched her as she poured. Eleanor felt his observation but maintained composure. Her hands were steady as she poured his cup, then her own. The teacup's warmth contrasted with her internal coldness. "I trust your journey was uneventful?" Alaric's question was perfunctory. There was no true interest in his tone. He took the cup she offered, their fingers brushing for a fleeting second. His skin felt cool. "It was," Eleanor replied, meeting his eyes briefly. She allowed no emotion to show. She noticed a slight curl at his lip, a hint of dismissiveness. He endured this formality as she did. The tea's blandness matched their conversation. "Good," he said, taking a sip. "The arrangements for the ceremony are complete." He spoke of it like a business transaction. Eleanor nodded, her gaze dropping to the teacup's pattern. The stiff fabric of her gown reminded her of the facade she wore. This was the man whose father had destroyed her family. This was the man she would marry, the unwitting key to her vengeance. The thought sent a jolt, a cold fire through her veins. Later that day, the wedding ceremony took place in Sterling Manor's small, private chapel. It was a cold, formal affair. The chapel was grand, with stained glass windows depicting stern saints. The air smelled of old dust and ancient stone, mingled with faint incense. A handful of witnesses were present, mostly family retainers. Their faces were solemn. The old officiant droned through the vows. Eleanor stood beside Alaric. Her simple white gown felt heavy, almost suffocating. It was a symbol of purity, yet she felt like a vessel of vengeance wrapped in lace. Her responses were clear, steady, each word a betrayal of her heart. She felt detached, watching herself perform a rehearsed role. When Alaric took her hand to place the ring, his touch was cool, impersonal. The gold band felt heavy, cold, an iron band sealing her fate, binding her to her mission. The small click as the ring slid onto her finger resonated with finality. She looked at him then, as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. His profile was unyielding, his gaze fixed beyond the altar. He did not look at her. He seemed disconnected, his presence a duty. The absence of any shared glance was not surprising. It was exactly what she expected. A bitter taste of duty filled her mouth. The formal pronouncement hung in the air. Eleanor Vance was now Lady Sterling, the daughter of a ruined man, now wife to the son of his destroyer. The irony was a sharp, internal pain. Her veil's stiffness, the delicate lace, felt like a barrier protecting the burning ember of her resolve. The muffled silence of the gathering felt oppressive. After the ceremony, a brief formal reception was held in a smaller drawing room. Small groups clustered, speaking in hushed tones. Eleanor found herself beside Alaric, a silent, ornamental figure beside an unapproachable statue. She felt the guests' gazes, a mix of curiosity and distance. Alaric exchanged perfunctory words with his relatives. He introduced Eleanor with a brief, clinical phrase. My wife, Lady Eleanor." Her name felt alien on his lips, stripped of personal meaning. She offered polite smiles, her hands clasped lightly, betraying nothing. The faint perfume of other guests seemed cloying. She observed Alaric. He was a man of power. His posture, his voice, his inherent authority, all spoke of command. Yet an aloofness separated him from the world. He was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, but his beauty was cold, like marble. She imagined the coldness of his skin, the sharp angles of his face, his piercing blue eyes seeing through people. Her inner voice hummed with strategic calculation. She needed to understand him, to observe his habits and movements. He guarded the secrets she sought, even if he did not know it. The clink of a champagne glass, the rustle of silk, all sounds were muted as she focused. The small pastries offered were tasteless and bland, like the conversation. As the evening wore on, guests departed. Soon only Eleanor and Alaric remained in the grand hall. Shadows filled the vast space. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn, sealing them within the manor's ancient embrace. The air felt colder now, the scent of old stone more pronounced. Alaric stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the dying embers. His face was a stern, unreadable mask. Eleanor stood a distance away, her posture rigid, her heart a silent drumbeat. The quiet creaks of the old house were the only witnesses to this desolate tableau. She looked at him across the hall. The distance between them felt immense. His profile was sharp against the gloom. He was utterly unaware of the silent storm brewing within her, the meticulous plans unfolding. Her dark eyes, usually somber, now held a fierce, unwavering light. A silent vow of vengeance burned in her gaze. He did not see it. He did not know. The chill of Sterling Manor seeped into Eleanor's bones, a constant, subtle presence beneath the rich tapestries and polished wood. Her vow, taken silently across the grand hall, pulsed with a cold fire in her veins. She was the Duchess now, mistress of this sprawling, silent house, a position that felt less like an honor and more like a carefully constructed cage. Every morning she rose with the first gray light, the weight of her family's lost name a heavy cloak around her shoulders. She would dress in gowns of deep greens and muted blues, chosen to blend with the manor's somber palette, her dark eyes reflecting its shadowy depths. Her days unfolded with a careful, measured pace. She walked the vast corridors, her footsteps soft on thick carpets, her hand often brushing against the cold stone walls. This was not a tour of a new home. It was a reconnaissance mission. Each grand salon, each dusty library, each echoing ballroom became a chamber in the fortress she needed to breach. Her gaze swept over towering bookshelves, ornate cabinets, and heavy locked doors. She cataloged every detail. The subtle creak of a floorboard near the north wing's disused drawing room, the faint scent of mildew in the furthest galleries, the way light fell through a particular stained glass window at midday. These observations were the first lines in her mental map, charting potential hiding places for the truth she sought. The silence of Sterling Manor was often profound, broken only by the distant clatter of servants in the kitchens or the whisper of wind through the tall, narrow windows. This quiet allowed her thoughts to echo, unbound. She saw her father's face, etched with despair as the accusations mounted. She felt the shame that had fallen upon her family, a burden crushing them beneath its unforgiving weight. Her heart, a tight knot of grief and determination, beat a relentless rhythm against her ribs. She gripped the smooth, cold railing of the grand staircase, her fingers tightening, imagining the very stones of this house holding the secrets of their ruin. One afternoon, as Eleanor made her way through a seldom-used pantry, examining its antiquated shelves with a feigned air of inspection, a small, wiry woman emerged from the shadows. Mrs. Agnes Finch, the housekeeper, moved with a quiet efficiency that seemed to precede her. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her small, knowing eyes, the color of wet slate, fixed upon Eleanor. There was no surprise in Mrs. Finch's gaze, only a deep, unsettling observation. "Good afternoon, Your Grace." Mrs. Finch's voice was soft, almost a murmur, yet it carried a distinct clarity in the still air. She held a feather duster, her hands gnarled with years of service. Eleanor turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Finch, I was merely familiarizing myself with the manor's provisions. A new household, you understand, requires a certain level of understanding." Her words were polite, her tone measured, yet she felt a prickle of unease under the housekeeper's steady regard. Mrs. Finch merely nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Indeed, Your Grace. Sterling Manor is a vast house, full of its own particular ways. Many years it has stood and seen much come and go." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips, a smile that held 1,000 unspoken tales. Eleanor felt a chill unrelated to the manor's temperature. This woman knew, not necessarily her specific purpose, but perhaps the deeper undercurrents of the house, the hidden currents of its history. "I am sure it has," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her pulse. She wondered what stories Mrs. Finch held, what secrets she had witnessed within these walls. Was she an ally or a formidable guardian of the very truths Eleanor sought to uncover? Eleanor decided then that Mrs. Finch was a person to be watched, to be approached with extreme caution. The woman's eyes held too much wisdom, too much unsaid knowledge. "If you require anything, Your Grace, I am always at hand," Mrs. Finch offered, her voice returning to its soft, dutiful tone. She then turned and disappeared as silently as she had appeared, leaving Eleanor alone once more with the lingering scent of spices and old wood and the unsettling feeling of having been thoroughly, if silently, assessed. Eleanor's fingers locked around the edge of a wooden crate, the rough surface digging into her skin. She knew then that every step she took, every corner she turned, was being watched, if not by human eyes, then by the very spirit of the house itself, a spirit embodied by its most ancient servant. Duke Alaric Sterling remained a distant, imposing figure. Their interactions were confined to formal meals in the cavernous dining room or brief, stilted conversations in the grand drawing room. He would inquire politely about her comfort, about her adjustment to her new home. His piercing blue eyes, which often held an arrogant glint, rarely met hers directly, preferring to sweep across the room, as if assessing its structural integrity, rather than the person before him. He spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, his voice commanding even in its casual tone. Eleanor observed him with an almost clinical detachment. He spent most of his days in his study, a room she had yet to truly explore, or riding across his vast estate, managing its affairs. His absorption in his duties was a convenient veil, allowing her greater freedom to pursue her own clandestine work. She learned the rhythms of his days, the sound of his heavy boots on the stairs at 7 in the morning, the distant clatter of his carriage leaving the courtyard after breakfast, the faint aroma of pipe tobacco that sometimes drifted from his study in the late evenings. His indifference to her, while painful in its implication of her insignificance, was also a shield. It meant he was less likely to notice her own quiet disappearances, her prolonged wanderings through the manor's forgotten wings. One evening, as Eleanor sat in the library, a heavy tome open on her lap, she heard Alaric's footsteps approaching. Her breath caught in her throat. She had been studying the intricate crests carved into the fireplace, wondering if they held any hidden meanings, any clues. Alaric paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed against the softer light of the corridor. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping inside. "Still finding solace in books, Eleanor?" His voice, though not unkind, held a faint edge of amusement, as if her intellectual pursuits were a quaint, feminine diversion. Eleanor closed the book, her fingers pressing against its leather cover. "The manor's library is quite extensive, Alaric. There is much to learn about its history, and indeed the history of this region." She offered him a small, polite smile, hoping her eyes did not betray the frantic beating of her heart. The scent of his cologne, sharp and masculine, reached her, a sudden, unsettling intimacy in the vast room. He walked over to a nearby globe, spinning it idly with one finger. "Indeed, a Sterling has resided here for centuries. The land remembers more than any book can tell, perhaps." He turned then, his eyes finally meeting hers, a brief, piercing glance that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. "I trust you are settling in, Duchess?" "As well as can be expected, Alaric," she replied, her voice soft but firm. She held his gaze, unwilling to be cowed, yet feeling a strange vulnerability under his scrutiny. He was a powerful man, his presence filling the grand space, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered what it would be like to be truly seen by him, not as a pawn in her game of vengeance, but as something more. The thought was quickly banished, replaced by the cold, clear image of her purpose. He nodded once, a curt gesture. "Good. The household runs smoothly?" "Mrs. Finch ensures it," Eleanor confirmed, her gaze dropping to the book in her lap. "She is an institution," Alaric stated, a faint, almost fond smile playing on his lips, a rare glimpse of emotion from him. "Her memory is longer than any ledger." He then turned, the movement fluid and decisive, and left the room as quietly as he had entered, leaving Eleanor with the lingering scent of his presence and the unsettling echo of his words. His indifference was her greatest weapon, but sometimes in these brief, unexpected encounters, a flicker of something else, something akin to human connection, threatened to disturb her resolve. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the frantic flutter of her heart. Weeks bled into months. Eleanor continued her meticulous exploration, her internal map growing ever more detailed. She had examined every accessible room, every parlor, every servant's quarters. The sheer scale of the manor was daunting, a labyrinth of secrets. She felt a growing frustration, a dull ache of disappointment with each empty cupboard, each unlocked drawer that yielded only linens or forgotten trinkets. The proof, the ledger, the correspondence, they remained elusive. She began to spend more time in the less frequented parts of the house, lingering in the back corridors, near the servants' stairs. Her ears, sharpened by her desperation, strained to catch fragments of conversations, whispers carried on the drafts. She understood that servants often held the keys to a house's true history, their casual gossip often revealing more than any formal document. One rain-swept evening, the wind rattling the ancient window panes, Eleanor found herself in a narrow service passage, a hidden route between the kitchen and the formal dining room. She had been returning to her chambers after a solitary dinner, the silence of the great house pressing in on her. Two voices, hushed and low, drifted from an alcove just ahead. She paused, her breath catching, melting into the deeper shadows of the corridor. Her heart began to pound a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. "Did you hear about the new ordering of the late Duke's things?" A woman's voice, a maid named Sarah, whispered, her tone laced with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Only that His Grace is having them moved slowly," a deeper, gruffer voice belonging to Thomas the footman replied. "But not the study, mind you. Never the study." Sarah made a soft, nervous sound. "That room, it always gave me the shivers. All locked up for years. What do you think was in there, Thomas?" Thomas's voice dropped even lower, almost to an inaudible rumble. "Secrets, Bera, old secrets. The late Duke Sterling, he kept things close to his chest, he did, especially in that private study of his." Eleanor stood frozen, her fingers digging into the rough plaster of the wall beside her. The words resonated in the quiet passage, cutting through the endless search, pointing her in a new terrifying direction. Her breath hitched. The late Duke Sterling's private study. Locked secrets. The phrase hung in the air, a beacon in the desolate darkness of her quest. The whispers were faint, like dry leaves skittering across cold stone. But to Eleanor, they were a thunderclap. The late Duke Sterling's private study. Locked secrets. The phrase echoed in her mind, a beacon in the vast, shadowed labyrinth of Sterling Manor. A new focus, sharp and precise, now guided her every step within the cold confines of her new home. She walked the corridors with a fresh purpose, her dark eyes scanning for any clue, any sign that might lead her to this forbidden room. The very air in the manor seemed to thicken with her anticipation. Her initial explorations had been slow, a careful mapping of territories, but now a potent urgency spurred her on. The memory of her father's face, etched with despair, fueled a relentless fire within her. She longed for the truth with an ache that throbbed beneath her ribs. Each morning as she dressed in the somber silks chosen by Sterling's staff, she felt the weight of her mission settle upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The silence of the manor felt both oppressive and strangely inviting, a canvas for her hidden agenda. Eleanor began to subtly alter her daily routine. Instead of lingering in the morning room, she would find herself drawn to the eastern wing, where the older sections of the manor lay shrouded in a perpetual dusk. Her fingers often brushed against the cold stone walls, seeking some hidden seam, some secret latch. The faint scent of aged parchment and beeswax clung to the air in these parts, a promise of forgotten histories. She imagined the previous Duke, Alaric's father, walking these very halls, his mind filled with the schemes that had brought her family to ruin. A bitter taste filled her mouth at the thought. She knew the layout of the manor's public spaces now. The grand ballrooms, the echoing dining halls, the long library filled with volumes she had yet to truly explore. But the private study remained an elusive mystery. She had overheard the servants mention it lay on the third floor, tucked away from the main family quarters. Access would not be simple. One afternoon, feigning an interest in the manor's architectural history, Eleanor ventured upstairs. The grand staircase, usually bustling with servants during the day, was quiet. Only the distant chime of a clock broke the silence. Her soft slippers made little sound on the polished wood. She ascended slowly, her gaze sweeping over portraits of stern-faced ancestors, each pair of painted eyes seeming to follow her. She imagined them judging her secret quest. A shiver ran down her spine, but her resolve remained unbroken. The third floor was noticeably colder, the air thicker with the scent of dust and disuse, Heavy oak doors lined a narrow corridor, many of them closed and seemingly untouched for years. She passed a collection of armor, glinting dully in the sparse light filtering through a high, grimy window. Her heart beat a little faster. This felt like a place where secrets might be kept. She finally found a door that felt different, heavier, more imposing than the others. It was devoid of the elaborate carvings that adorned most of the manor's doors. A plain dark wood reinforced with iron straps, it had a formidable, almost defiant air. This had to be it. Her breath hitched in her throat. She approached cautiously, her hand hovering just inches from the cold brass knob. It was still, unyielding, locked. She pressed her ear to the wood, hearing only the distant, faint creak of the old house settling. No sound from within. She tried the knob again, gently, almost hopefully. It would not turn. A wave of disappointment washed over her, sharp and sudden. She had half expected it, yet the reality of the barrier was a bitter pill. She pulled her hand back, her fingers tingling from the cold metal. As she stood there, a soft cough echoed from the end of the corridor. Eleanor froze, her body tensing. She turned to see Mrs. Agnes Finch, the housekeeper, approaching with a duster in her hand, her eyes sharp and discerning. Mrs. Finch's presence always felt like a quiet judgment, a knowing gaze that saw more than Eleanor ever intended to reveal. Eleanor quickly composed herself, forcing a polite smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Finch," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I was simply admiring the architecture. This wing of the manor is quite different from the others." Mrs. Finch's eyes flickered to the heavy door Eleanor had just been inspecting. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Indeed, Your Grace, this wing holds many memories, much history." Eleanor felt a blush creeping up her neck. Had she been too obvious? She quickly shifted her focus. "Yes, I imagine so. The late Duke Sterling, Alaric's father, must have spent many years here. What kind of man was he, if you do not mind my asking?" She hoped her tone conveyed only innocent curiosity, the typical inquiries of a new mistress trying to understand her surroundings. Mrs. Finch paused, her gaze distant, as if sifting through decades of memories. "He was a powerful man, Your Grace, very particular. He kept to his routines, and his studies, of course." Her eyes, however, did not quite meet Eleanor's. There was a guardedness there, a subtle hesitation. "His studies?" Eleanor prompted, trying to sound casual. "Was he a scholar?" The housekeeper gave a small, dry chuckle. "In his own way, perhaps. He was a man of business, Your Grace, of affairs. He spent much time in his private chambers. Here on this floor." Mrs. Finch gestured vaguely down the corridor, encompassing the heavy door behind Eleanor without directly naming it. Eleanor felt a thrill of recognition. This was it, the private study, but the conversation could not be pushed too far. She sensed Mrs. Finch's reluctance to speak plainly, a loyalty to the past that might become an obstacle. "I see," Eleanor murmured, trying to absorb the information without betraying her intense interest. "It must have been a difficult adjustment for everyone when he passed." Mrs. Finch nodded slowly, her expression clouding with a hint of sorrow. "Change is always difficult, Your Grace, but life in the manor must go on." She then excused herself, stating there were other rooms to tend to, leaving Eleanor alone once more, the heavy door still looming silently behind her. Days turned into weeks, each one a testament to Eleanor's growing frustration. Every attempt to gain access to the study was met with failure. It remained locked, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. Sometimes she would notice a footman lingering near the corridor, or hear the quiet rustle of a maid's skirts approaching. Always when she was near the forbidden door, it was as if an invisible web of vigilance surrounded the room, making any direct approach impossible. She felt eyes on her, even when no one was visible. The walls themselves seemed to whisper warnings. Her inner voice began to prickle with impatience. Time was slipping away. She had promised her family, her father's memory, that she would uncover the truth. The burden felt heavier with each passing day. The opulent rooms of Stirling Manor, once merely cold, now felt like an elaborate marriage. She found herself staring out of tall windows at the manicured gardens, seeing only the wild, overgrown grounds of her family's ruined estate in her mind's eye. The contrast was a constant, gnawing pain. Eleanor decided a more subtle approach was necessary, focusing her attention on Mrs. Finch. The housekeeper seemed to hold a vast reservoir of knowledge about the manor and its past, a quiet observer of all that transpired within its walls. Eleanor began to seek out Mrs. Finch more frequently, ostensibly for advice on managing the household or inquiries about historical artifacts. She would find Mrs. Finch in the linen room, the scent of lavender and starched fabric hanging heavy in the air, or in the vast kitchen, where the clatter of pots and pans was a constant, comforting rhythm. Eleanor would ask about the manor's previous occupants, about the traditions and peculiarities of the Sterling family. She would choose her words carefully, weaving her questions about the late Duke into broader conversations about the manor's lineage. Mrs. Finch, Eleanor began one afternoon, as the housekeeper was arranging freshly cut roses in a vase, their fragrance sharp and sweet. This manor has seen generations, has it not? I imagine each Duke left his own unique mark. Mrs. Finch meticulously trimmed a stem, her movements precise. Indeed, Your Grace, each Duke was his own man, with his own way of doing things. Her tone was neutral, but Eleanor sensed the unspoken stories beneath the surface. And Duke Alaric's father? Eleanor pressed gently, watching the housekeeper's face for any tell. He was known for his meticulousness, I hear. The housekeeper set the vase down, her gaze meeting Eleanor's across the polished table. Meticulous was one word for it, Your Grace. He was a man who preferred order and privacy. She paused, her eyes seeming to hold a world of suppressed information. He did not care for disruption or for questions. Eleanor felt a flicker of frustration. Mrs. Finch was a wall, polite but unyielding. Yet there was a quiet understanding in her gaze, a shared knowledge of unspoken truths that intrigued Eleanor. I only wish to understand the history of my new home, Eleanor said, keeping her voice light. To honor the past. Is there any particular part of the manor that held special significance for the late Duke? Mrs. Finch picked up another rose, her fingers tracing its delicate petals. The library, of course, was much used, and his private chambers. He spent many hours there, often late into the night. She glanced up at Eleanor, a faint, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. He was a man who preferred the quiet hours for his work. Eleanor's mind raced. Private chambers, late into the night. It all pointed to the study. But what work had he been doing? What secrets had he kept hidden in those quiet hours? The desire to know, to find the truth, intensified within her. Meanwhile, Duke Alaric remained largely oblivious to Eleanor's subtle machinations. His world was one of estate management, political maneuvering, and the casual comforts of his inherited wealth. He saw Eleanor as his duchess, a necessary and beautiful ornament to his life, but little more. He observed her occasional forays into the older wings of the manor or her quiet conversations with Mrs. Finch with a dismissive air. One evening during their formal dinner, Alaric watched Eleanor push a roasted duck around her plate, her gaze lost in thought. The candlelight flickered across her face, highlighting the deep shadows beneath her eyes. He found her beauty striking, even when she seemed distant. You seem preoccupied, Eleanor, Alaric observed, his voice carrying an undertone of mild amusement. Are the demands of the household already proving too much for you? Eleanor looked up, startled from her reverie. She quickly composed herself. Not at all, Alaric. I find myself simply curious about Sterling Manor. It is a grand estate with such a rich history. She offered him a small, polite smile. I have been speaking with Mrs. Finch about the manor's past, about your father's time here. Alaric took a sip of wine, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ah, yes, Mrs. Finch is a walking archive, is she not? My father was a man of great ambition. He certainly left his mark. His tone suggested a degree of pride, a legacy he readily accepted without question. Indeed, Eleanor agreed, carefully choosing her next words. She mentioned he spent many hours in his private study. I imagine he managed much of the estate's affairs from there. Alaric waved a dismissive hand. He was a busy man, yes, always with his ledgers and letters. But all of that is behind us now. You should focus on making this manor your own, Eleanor, on the more pleasant aspects of being a duchess. He looked at her with a condescending fondness, seeing her curiosity as a charming, if somewhat naive, trait. His dismissal stung. Eleanor felt a surge of cold fury. He truly had no idea. He saw her as a pretty object, easily distracted by domestic trifles. Her grief, her burning need for justice were entirely invisible to him. She longed to shake him, to force him to see the terrible truth that lay hidden within the walls of his own family home. But she held her tongue, her gaze dropping to her untouched plate. "Of course, Alaric," she replied, her voice flat. "I merely wish to understand the foundation upon which this household rests." She let the subtle double meaning hang in the air, hoping it might spark some flicker of insight within him. But he only nodded, already turning his attention to the footman refilling his wineglass. His casual indifference only hardened her resolve. He would be forced to see the truth eventually, and when he did, his world would be irrevocably shattered. The thought brought a grim satisfaction, tinged with a strange, unsettling sadness. It was a victory she did not wish to savor, only to achieve. Eleanor continued her quiet inquiries, circling the topic of the study with the patience of a predator. She learned that the late Duke had been exceptionally private about his work, often sending away even his most trusted staff when he retired to his study. He had kept his own keys, she discovered, and rarely allowed anyone else to clean or organize the room. This explained why it remained locked, undisturbed. One chilly morning, Eleanor found Mrs. Finch dusting the portrait of the late Duke Sterling in a quiet gallery. The painted eyes of the man seemed to follow Eleanor, cold and unblinking. Eleanor shuddered internally. "He had a formidable presence, did he not?" Eleanor commented, her voice hushed. Mrs. Finch stopped dusting, her small, wiry frame stiffening slightly. "He was a man who knew what he wanted, Your Grace, and usually he got it." "And his work?" Eleanor ventured, her heart thumping softly. "Was it always strictly official? Affairs of the estate?" Mrs. Finch sighed, a sound barely audible above the rustle of her duster. She turned to face Eleanor, her kind eyes now holding a deep, knowing sorrow. "The late Duke kept certain affairs very private, Your Grace. Very private indeed." Her gaze held Eleanor's, a silent communication passing between them, a recognition of something dark and unspoken. He often worked late into the night in his study, long after the rest of the manor was asleep. The scent of aged paper and leather hung heavy in the air, a testament to centuries of forgotten thoughts. Eleanor moved among the towering bookshelves, her footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs, a ghost in the vast silence of Stirling Manor's grand library. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of sunlight that pierced the heavy velvet drapes, illuminating an endless labyrinth of knowledge. She had spent countless hours here, each visit a meticulous, quiet excavation. Her fingers traced the spines of volumes, feeling the rough texture of ancient cloth, the smooth chill of polished wood. Every hidden nook, every obscure shelf, every crevice felt like a potential sanctuary for the truth she desperately sought. Mrs. Finch's words echoed in her mind, a soft, knowing whisper about the late Duke's private affairs, his late nights. Eleanor imagined him, a formidable shadow moving through these very rooms, perhaps with a secret smile playing on his lips, knowing the extent of his deceit. The thought hardened her resolve, sharpening her focus. She was not merely searching for documents, she was hunting for justice. Her family's honor, her father's ruined name, demanded nothing less. She had already systematically gone through the more obvious places, the desk drawers, the locked cabinets, the spaces behind paintings. Nothing. Only the stale air of disuse, the lingering scent of forgotten ambition. Her initial surge of hope, after hearing about the private study, had waned into a persistent, dull ache of frustration. This manor was a fortress of secrets, built not just with stone, but with lies. She ran her hand over a row of particularly old, uniformly bound books, their titles indecipherable in the dim light. Many of them were decorative, she suspected, rarely touched. This made them prime candidates. Her fingers paused on a thick, leather-bound volume, its binding slightly looser than the others. It was a collection of archaic legal precedents, a subject far too dry for even a voracious reader. She pulled it from the shelf, its weight surprising, heavier than its size suggested. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration marred the side where it met the spine. She turned it over in her hands, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thump against her ribs. The leather felt unexpectedly smooth in one spot, a small square that seemed out of place. Her thumb pressed lightly, then more firmly. A soft click, barely audible above the quiet hum of the old house, broke the silence. A small, narrow panel, perfectly disguised within the book's spine, sprang open. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, lay a single, folded piece of parchment. Her breath hitched. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled as she extracted the note. It was thin, brittle, and faded with age. The ink, though pale, was still legible. Her eyes quickly scanned the elegant script. 18th of June, Ledger, North Wing, beneath the sundial. A date, a location, a word, Ledger. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. This was it. This was the first tangible thread in the tapestry of deception. A surge of elation, potent and dizzying, washed over her. She had found something. After weeks of fruitless searching, of battling despair, a real clue lay in her hand. But with the elation came a chilling wave of fear. This was dangerous. This was real. She was no longer merely speculating. She was holding a piece of her enemy's past. What if someone knew? What if she was being watched? Her gaze darted around the enormous room, the shadows suddenly seeming deeper, more ominous. The sunlight had faded further, casting long, distorted shapes across the polished floor. The vastness of the library, once a comforting cloak of privacy, now felt like a gaping maw, ready to swallow her whole. She could hear nothing but the frantic beat of her own heart, a drum against her ribs. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into the smallest, deepest pocket of her gown, a space she had sewn specifically for such a discovery. Then, with painstaking care, she gently pushed the tiny panel back into place. It clicked, shut, leaving no trace. The book, now seemingly ordinary, was returned to its spot on the shelf. She leaned against the cool wood, trying to regulate her breathing. Her legs felt weak, her head light. The air tasted metallic, sharp with adrenaline. She needed to leave, to process this alone, to plan her next move. The North Wing, the sundial. Those words resonated, promising more secrets, more pain, more truth. But as she took a tentative step toward the door, a low, resonant cough echoed from the far end of the library. Her body froze. Every muscle tensed, every nerve screamed. She spun around, her eyes wide, searching the deepening gloom. A tall figure emerged from the shadows near the grand fireplace, a book held casually in one hand. Duke Alaric Sterling, her stomach plummeted. He stood there, impossibly calm, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her. A wave of ice and fire swept through her veins. He had been there all along, or had he just entered? Her mind raced, replaying her last few minutes. Had he seen her? Had he heard the click? Had the tremble in her hands been visible? Her face, she hoped, remained an impassive mask, but inside a violent storm raged. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate through the ancient walls. "I did not realize you enjoyed the library's quiet solitude as much as I do." He walked toward her, his movements fluid, unhurried, each step radiating an unnerving confidence. He seemed entirely at ease, oblivious to the tempest churning within her. Her fingers instinctively touched the pocket where the note rested, a desperate, silent prayer for concealment. She forced a small, polite smile, the kind she had perfected for polite society, a fragile shield against his scrutiny. "Good evening, Alaric," she replied, her voice to her immense relief, steady. "I was merely seeking a diversion. The silence here is indeed profound." He stopped a few paces away, his height dominating the space between them. The light from a nearby window caught his profile, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the arrogant curve of his lips. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored smoking jacket, its velvet absorbing the little light available. He looked exactly as he always did, handsome, commanding, and utterly unknowable. "A diversion," he mused, his eyes sweeping over the rows of books, then back to her. "Indeed, I find myself often retreating here when the day's affairs become too demanding." He paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. You seem a little flushed, my dear. Is the air too warm for you? Her heart skipped a beat. Had he noticed? Was he toying with her? She fought to keep her composure, to ignore the sudden rush of heat to her cheeks. Perhaps a little, she said, managing a light, airy tone. I confess I spent rather too long poring over some old texts. My eyes are growing tired. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was all she had. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his blue eyes. Old texts? I had not taken you for a scholar, Eleanor. I imagined your interest lay more in poetry, perhaps, or romantic novels. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, a subtle condescension that usually stung her. Tonight it was a welcome distraction, a familiar pain that eclipsed the new, raw fear. One must cultivate a breadth of knowledge, Duke, she retorted, allowing a touch of her own controlled coolness to surface. Even the most mundane of books can hold unexpected wisdom. She inwardly winced at the double meaning of her words, praying he wouldn't catch it. He merely offered a slight, enigmatic smile and turned his attention to a section of books on ancient history, directly adjacent to where she had made her discovery. Panic seized her again. Was he going to the very spot? Was this a trap? She watched him, her breath caught in her throat, every muscle rigid. He reached out, his long fingers running along the spines of the books, seemingly at random. The old legal precedents were just 2 shelves down from his current position. The air crackled with unspoken tension. She felt the chill of the room, the faint scent of beeswax and dry paper, acutely. Her ears strained, listening for any telltale sign, any deviation in his casual search. He pulled a thick volume from the shelf, its cover a dark, worn leather. It was not the book, not her book. A wave of profound, dizzying relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her sway. She clenched her hands into fists, her fingernails digging into her palms, anchoring herself. He opened the book, flipping idly through its pages, his gaze distant, thoughtful. He was truly just seeking a diversion, just as he had claimed. The irony was almost unbearable. This manor, he began, his voice softer now, almost contemplative. It holds many memories, some pleasant, some less so. He looked up from the book, his eyes meeting hers across the dim expanse of the library. One can almost feel the weight of history in these walls, can't one? His words, usually so precise and controlled, held a vulnerability she had not heard before. It was a fleeting moment, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. She found herself momentarily disarmed, her focus shifting from the immediate threat of discovery to the unexpected intimacy of his confession. The weight of her own family's history, the heavy burden of her mission, settled around her like a shroud. She understood the feeling, the suffocating presence of a past that refused to be forgotten. Indeed, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The past has a way of lingering, does it not? He nodded slowly, a somber expression on his face. He closed the book he held, its pages rustling softly. It does, and sometimes one wishes it would simply fade. He took another step, then another, moving towards a different section of the shelves, closer to her, though still not directly to her hidden treasure. He was replacing the book he had just perused. She watched his movements, her heart still thrumming a frantic rhythm. He reached for a vacant spot on a shelf just above her shoulder. As he extended his arm, his fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting electric contact that sent a shock through her entire being. It was an accident, a casual touch in the dim light, yet it was sudden and utterly unexpected. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, coursed through her veins, leaving her breathless. Her skin tingled where his hand had grazed hers, a warmth spreading through her arm, up to her chest. It was a sensation entirely divorced from her mission, from her hatred, from her carefully constructed emotional distance. It was simply human, a purely physical, visceral reaction that surprised her with its intensity. For a brief, dizzying moment, her mind went blank, all thoughts of notes, ledgers, and vengeance completely overshadowed by the unsettling intimacy of that fleeting touch. She pulled her hand back almost imperceptibly, her eyes wide, locked on his. The faint scent of old parchment clung to Eleanor's fingertips, a dusty whisper from a past she was determined to unravel. The cryptic note, discovered behind the false bottom of a forgotten book, now lay spread across the polished surface of her dressing table. Moonlight, cool and detached, streamed through the tall window, illuminating the intricate script. She traced the faded ink with a thoughtful finger, her dark eyes narrowing in concentration. The words were simple, yet deliberately obscure, a puzzle meant to guard a secret, not reveal it freely. Beneath the watchful gaze of the lion, where silent histories sleep, the ledger awaits the dawn's first light, when shadows yield to truth. Eleanor read the line again, letting the rhythm of the words settle in her mind. Her heart thumped a slow, heavy beat against her ribs. The lion. Stirling Manor was replete with lions, carved into cornices, emblazoned on tapestries, guarding the grand entrance. This clue was not about a specific lion. It had to be a more direct reference to a location within the late Duke's study, the very place Mrs. Finch had hinted at. The study, a room she had not yet breached. She recalled the grand fireplace in the study, its mantelpiece adorned with a pair of stone lions, their eyes hollow and unseeing, beneath the watchful gaze of the lion. Could it be there? And where silent histories sleep? The shelves of books, perhaps, or a hidden compartment within the walls. The phrase, "the ledger awaits the dawn's first light," when shadows yield to truth, felt like a coded instruction. It suggested either a time-sensitive reveal or a location that became visible only with the rising sun. Perhaps a specific angle of light would illuminate a hidden detail. This was not a simple treasure hunt. It was a battle of wits against a man long dead, a man who had orchestrated her family's ruin. A cold shiver traced its way down her spine, not from fear, but from the immense gravity of her mission. She was so close, closer than she had ever dared to hope. Her fingers locked around the smooth glass of a water goblet on her table. She knew if she let go, she might drop it. Every fiber of her being screamed to rush forward, to tear into the study and find the truth. Yet caution was her most potent weapon. She had to think, to plan, to anticipate every possible obstacle. The late Duke Sterling had been a formidable adversary in life, and it seemed he continued to be so even in death. Accessing the study was her next most critical step. The door was always locked. Alaric, the current Duke, held the key. She needed to observe him, to understand his habits, to find a moment of vulnerability in his guarded routine. From that evening onward, Eleanor's gaze sharpened. She watched Alaric with a new, intense focus. Every gesture, every movement, a potential piece of the puzzle. During breakfast, she noticed how he would often place a small, ornate silver key on the corner of his plate after finishing his tea, before pocketing it. It was a habit, a small ritual of his. Her eyes followed the glint of the silver, a silent hunger in their depths. He never left it unattended for long, always retrieving it with a casual, almost unconscious movement. He carried it with him when he left the manor for his daily rides or administrative duties. He brought it back at dinner. It was always on his person or placed in a very specific spot. Her days became a careful ballet of observation. She would sit in the drawing room, ostensibly engaged in needlework, but her ears were attuned to the distant sounds of the manor, her eyes tracking Alaric's movements through the arched doorways. She noticed his preferred armchair by the study fireplace, the way he would often read the morning papers there, sometimes dozing for a few moments after a particularly early start. She learned that he usually retired to the study late in the evenings after the household had settled down, often working for an hour or two before going to bed. One afternoon, as she walked through the long, echoing corridors, she saw him emerge from the study. He had forgotten to close the door fully. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand instinctively reached out, her fingers curling, as if to grasp the opportunity. But he turned back almost immediately, a slight frown on his face, and pulled the door shut with a soft click. The sound resonated through the quiet hall like a hammer blow. She had missed her chance. A wave of frustration, hot and bitter, washed over her. She pressed her lips together, her resolve hardening. She would not be deterred. As she meticulously mapped out his routine, a strange, unexpected undercurrent began to emerge. Alaric, the man she had sworn to bring down, was not merely a proud, self-assured duke. He was also, at times, unexpectedly considerate. One chilly evening, As they sat in the grand dining hall, a vast space that always felt too large for just two people, he noticed her shiver slightly. Without a word, he signaled to a footman, who promptly brought a cashmere shawl and draped it gently over her shoulders. His gaze, usually so distant, held a flicker of genuine concern. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, yet it caused a knot to tighten in Eleanor's stomach. Another day, during an unusually dry spell, she mentioned her despair over her wilting rose garden. The next morning, she found a gardener working diligently, installing a new irrigation system Alaric had quietly arranged. He said nothing about it at breakfast, but his eyes met hers across the table, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to his lips, a ghost of a smile. Eleanor felt a strange tremor, a disquieting warmth spread through her chest. It was not the cold, calculating satisfaction she expected. It was something else, something far more complicated. She found herself questioning her carefully constructed image of him. He was supposed to be the enemy, the embodiment of the wrong done to her family. Yet, these small acts of kindness chipped away at the solid wall of her hatred. She remembered the startling jolt when his hand had brushed hers in the library. It was a physical sensation, an undeniable current that had passed between them, leaving her unsettled. She had dismissed it then, attributing it to nerves, to the sheer proximity of her adversary. Now, these continued gestures made it harder to maintain that convenient dismissal. One afternoon, she was struggling with a heavy book in the library, trying to reach a high shelf. Alaric, who had entered unnoticed, simply extended a hand, retrieved the volume with ease, and placed it before her. Their fingers brushed again, briefly, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the unexpected strength in his touch. He offered a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement, and then turned away to his own pursuits. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was dangerous. These moments, these silent connections, were eroding her resolve. She walked away from the library that day feeling a profound confusion. Her purpose, once so clear and sharp, seemed to be softening at the edges. Her father's memory, the anguish of her family, the burning need for justice. They were all still there, vivid and raw. But now they were overlaid with an unwelcome layer of something akin to guilt, or perhaps a nascent understanding. She hated herself for it. How could she feel anything but contempt for the son of the man who had destroyed her world? She sought out Mrs. Finch, hoping for some grounding. The housekeeper, always observant, seemed to sense Eleanor's turmoil. "The manor has many secrets, Duchess," Mrs. Finch said softly as she poured tea in the morning room, "and not all of them are dark. Sometimes light finds its way even into the oldest stones." Eleanor looked at her, searching for deeper meaning. "Do you think so, Mrs. Finch?" The old woman nodded slowly. "A man is not merely the sum of his father's deeds, my lady. He is also the choices he makes, the kindnesses he offers, the burdens he chooses to bear." Her words hung in the air, a gentle challenge to Eleanor's hardened perception. Eleanor swallowed, the tea suddenly bitter on her tongue. The conversation did little to soothe her. Instead, it amplified the unsettling dissonance within her. Despite the growing emotional complexity, her strategic mind remained sharp. She knew she needed the key. She needed a moment when Alaric would be distracted, truly preoccupied, or simply not present. She considered the possibility of asking him for it directly, under some pretense, but dismissed the idea almost immediately. Her request would surely raise his suspicions. This had to be done in secret without his knowledge. She needed to observe the key, not just Alaric. She realized the key was almost always on his person or in his private desk in his main office, which was also kept locked. The only real vulnerability was when he left for longer periods, but his trips were infrequent and unpredictable. She needed a moment, however brief, when the key might be separate from him. She knew he often placed it on his bedside table before retiring, a habit she had observed through discreet glances into his room when his valet was tidying. This was her opportunity. Her plan began to take shape. It was bold, risky, and depended on precise timing. She would wait for an evening when Alaric was particularly absorbed in his work in the study, or perhaps had retired early. She would then find a reason to be near his chambers, perhaps a fabricated need to speak with his valet about some household matter. In that brief window, she hoped to seize the key. Her heart hammered against her ribs at the mere thought. The sheer audacity of it left her breathless. One evening, a little over a week after her initial discovery, Eleanor found herself pacing her chambers. The cryptic note tucked safely away, its message clearer now. She had spent the day anticipating her move, a coil of nervous energy tightening within her. Alaric had been unusually quiet at dinner, absorbed in a letter he had received earlier. He seemed distracted, his thoughts elsewhere. This might be her chance. She dressed in a dark, simple gown, one that would blend into the shadows of the silent manor. She practiced her breathing, willing her racing pulse to steady. Every sound in the ancient house seemed amplified, every creak of the floorboards, every distant chime of the grandfather clock. She moved towards the corridor leading to Alaric's chambers, her steps light, almost soundless. The silence of the manor pressed in on her, a heavy blanket. As she neared Alaric's part of the wing, a faint flicker of light caught her eye. It was not from a lamp in the main corridor, but seemed to emanate from further down, closer to the forbidden study. A cold wave of apprehension washed over her. She paused, pressing herself against the shadowed wall, her breath held. The air itself felt thick with anticipation, or perhaps something more sinister. The light seemed to emanate from the study door itself, her eyes strained in the dimness. It was undeniable. A thin, golden sliver of light escaped from beneath the study door, and another, even fainter, from the narrow gap where the door met its frame. The door was not fully closed. It was ajar. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of possibilities. Had Alaric forgotten to close it? Had he left it open deliberately? Was he inside? Or was this a test, a trap, waiting for her to stumble into it? The thought sent a jolt of icy fear through her veins. She had planned for stealth, for a meticulous acquisition of the key. She had not planned for the door to simply be open. The unexpected shift in circumstances threw her carefully constructed resolve into disarray. She stood frozen, her hand hovering, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The temptation to simply walk through the opening, to finally step into the forbidden room, was overwhelming. The truth lay within, waiting for her. Yet, the suddenness, the ease of it, felt wrong. It felt too easy. A chilling sensation crept up her spine. She could almost feel eyes watching her from the darkness, or from within the shadowy depths of the study itself. Her breath hitched. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions. She needed to enter, to fulfill her purpose, to avenge her family. But she hesitated, a profound sense of caution warring with her burning desire. This was not the way she had envisioned it. This felt like a dangerous game, one she had not anticipated. The scent of rain-soaked earth clung to the air. It was a final farewell as Duke Alaric rode out of Stirling Manor. Eleanor watched his retreating figure from an upstairs window. Her breath held tight in her chest. A short trip, he had called it. He would be gone for 2 days, perhaps 3. This was her chance. Her heart, a tight knot of apprehension and resolve, began to quicken its pace. She turned from the window, the image of Alaric's distant back fading from her sight. The silence of the manor seemed to deepen around her, amplifying the soft rustle of her skirts. She moved with a quiet urgency, her steps light upon the polished floors. The vast house felt different without Alaric's presence. Less watchful, more vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little further. Every echo carried a little longer. She passed Mrs. Finch in a corridor. The housekeeper's eyes, usually so sharp, held a flicker of something unreadable as they met Eleanor's. There was no exchange of words, only a shared moment that felt weighted with unspoken understanding. Eleanor offered a small, polite nod. Mrs. Finch returned it with a faint, knowing smile that did little to ease the tension in Eleanor's shoulders. The sun had begun its slow descent. Long streaks of orange and purple painted the western sky. Eleanor knew she had only a few precious hours before the full darkness set in. The lamps, once lit, would cast too many revealing beams. She reached the door to the late Duke's study. It stood as she had left it the other night, firmly closed. This time there was no sliver of light, no hint of a trap, just the solid, imposing oak. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the doorknob. A shiver traced its way down her spine. This was it, the moment she had planned for, waited for, dreamed of for so long. She pushed the door inward. It opened with a soft sigh, revealing an interior steeped in shadows and the faint, musty scent of aged paper and leather. The air was still, heavy with the ghosts of thoughts and decisions made within these very walls. Eleanor stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. The click of the latch sounded impossibly loud in the hushed room. She stood for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the towering bookshelves, the heavy mahogany desk, the dark velvet curtains that blocked out the last vestiges of daylight. This was the nerve center of the man who had destroyed her family. The sheer weight of that realization pressed down on her. Her father's face flashed in her mind, etched with a quiet dignity, even in ruin. A tear, sharp and hot, pricked at the corner of her eye. She blinked it away. There was no time for tears now, not yet. Justice first. Then perhaps she could mourn. She began her search methodically. She started with the large desk that dominated the center of the room. Its surface was clear, cleared by Alaric perhaps, but the drawers below. She ran her hand along the polished wood, feeling for any hidden catches, any loose panels. Each drawer pulled open with a soft groan, revealing only neatly stacked documents related to estate management, maps of lands, ledgers of rents, correspondence with tenants, nothing that spoke of treachery or deceit. She closed each drawer with a quiet click, her frustration growing with every empty space. Next, she moved to the bookshelves. They rose from floor to ceiling, laden with thousands of volumes, histories, philosophies, legal texts, works of art, and science. The sheer volume of knowledge contained within these walls was staggering. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the rough texture of old bindings, the smooth coolness of newer leather. Her eyes scanned for anything unusual, a book out of place, a spine that looked thicker than it should be, a title that seemed incongruous with the rest. Her father had loved books. He would have spent hours in a room like this, lost in thought. A pang of raw longing pierced her. She pushed it back. This was not a place for sentimental journeys. It was a battlefield. She began to tap gently along the panels behind the books, listening for any hollow sounds. The wood was solid, unwavering, echoing with a dull thud. Her hopes, which had flared so brightly with Alaric's departure, began to wane. The silence of the study pressed in on her, almost mocking her efforts. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The light outside had faded completely now. Only the faint glow of the manor's exterior lamps filtered through the gaps in the heavy curtains. She pulled a small lamp from her reticule, carefully lighting its wick. A warm golden glow bloomed in the immediate vicinity, pushing back the deeper shadows. It made the room feel a little less menacing, but also more exposed. Her breath hitched every time a floorboard creaked in the distant hall. Was it Mrs. Finch, a passing servant, or something worse, someone coming to check on her? She reminded herself that Alaric was gone. There was no one in the manor who would suspect her. Yet the fear of discovery was a constant, cold companion, tightening its grip on her throat. She moved to a different section of the shelves, her eyes narrowed in concentration. This section held older volumes, their covers faded, their pages yellowed with time. She pulled out a heavy tome, its pages crumbling slightly at her touch. She fanned through it quickly, looking for anything tucked inside. Nothing. Her fingers were growing dusty. A fine film coated everything in this room. She wiped her hands on her skirt, a gesture of almost unconscious frustration. Her eyes darted across the room again, seeking some pattern, some anomaly she might have missed. The late Duke had been a meticulous man, she knew. He would not have left his secrets exposed. They would be hidden, cleverly, subtly. She thought of the cryptic note she had found in the library, the reference to a specific date in a ledger. This room, she felt it in her bones, was where those secrets resided. She just had to find the right key, the right touch. She pressed harder against the back panels of the shelves, feeling for any give. Her fingers ached from the constant pressure. Her eyes were tired, strained from the effort of peering into the gloom. She straightened up, stretching her back, which protested with a soft pop. She took a deep, shaky breath. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and dust, filled her lungs. She looked up at the very top shelves, almost out of reach. She stood on a small, sturdy stool, her hands reaching above her head. The books up here were mostly large, leather-bound sets of ancient law and parliamentary records. Unlikely places for a secret, she thought. But then, sometimes the most obvious place was the best hiding place precisely because it seemed so uninteresting. She tapped along the top edge of the shelf, still nothing. Her gaze drifted lower to a section hidden partially by a decorative pillar. She reached out, her fingers running along the wooden panels. The wood felt cool, smooth, just like all the others. But then, as her hand brushed past a particular spot, there was a faint, almost imperceptible give. Her heart leaped into her throat. She pressed again, more deliberately this time. A small, almost invisible seam appeared. It was expertly disguised, blended perfectly with the grain of the wood. The panel was not just loose, it was designed to move. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins, banishing all weariness. Her breath hitched once more, but this time it was with a thrill of anticipation, not fear. Her fingers, trembling slightly, pushed against the panel. It slid inward with a soft, dry whisper of wood against wood. A small, dark void was revealed behind it. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilating in the low light. This was it. This was the secret. She reached her hand into the space, her fingers brushing against something solid, cold, and metallic. She pulled out a dusty, iron-bound chest. It was heavy, much heavier than she had anticipated, its weight pulling against her arm. She carefully lowered it to the floor. The metal was dark, almost black, with intricate engravings that were difficult to discern in the dim light. Its surface felt cold and unyielding beneath her fingertips. A complex lock mechanism, adorned with what looked like ancient symbols, sat squarely in its center. The chest exuded an aura of immense age, of secrets kept for decades, perhaps even longer. It pulsed with a silent energy. This was no ordinary box. This was the vault of the late Duke's darkest truths. Eleanor knelt before it, her gaze fixed on the intricate lock. A chilling sense of anticipation washed over her. It mingled with a profound, almost overwhelming understanding that she stood at the precipice of everything. Her quest, her vengeance, her family's honor, not only locked within this ancient metal box. The cold metal of the intricate lock bit into Eleanor's fingertips. Her breath hitched, thin and shallow, in the silent, cavernous study. Hours had slipped past, swallowed by the oppressive darkness, punctuated only by the distant chime of the manor's clock. Each click and scrape of the lockpick echoed in the vast room, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She leaned closer, the faint scent of aged leather and dust filling her nostrils. A stark reminder of the secrets held within this chamber. Her eyes, strained from the dim lantern light, traced the ornate patterns etched into the lock's face. This was not merely a mechanism. It was a testament to the late Duke's paranoia, a fortress guarding his darkest truths. A tremor ran through her arm, not from fatigue, but from the immense weight of expectation. Her family's honor, her father's tarnished name, the very foundation of her existence, all hinged on this one stubborn lock. She remembered her father's quiet dignity, the way he would run his hand over the spines of his own books, his eyes filled with a gentle wisdom that had been so cruelly extinguished. A fresh pang of grief, sharp and insistent, pierced through her. It fueled her resolve, hardening the slight tremble in her hands into a steely focus. She adjusted the pick, feeling for the subtle resistance, the almost imperceptible give of the tumblers. Each tiny movement was a gamble, a silent prayer against the overwhelming odds. The air grew heavy, thick with the unsaid narratives of the past. Her imagination conjured images of the late Duke Sterling, his shadow perhaps lingering in this very room, his cold gaze resting on the chest she now struggled to open. She could almost feel his presence, a silent challenge from beyond the grave. The thought brought a shiver down her spine, but it also spurred her onward. She would not be deterred, not by the dead, and certainly not by the living. Her fingers were aching now, stiff with the cold and the prolonged tension. She paused for a moment, pressing her palms together, trying to coax warmth back into them. The silence of the night was profound, broken only by the crackle of the lantern's wick. Outside, the world slept, oblivious to the quiet battle unfolding within Stirling Manor. Here, within these walls, the fate of two families was being rewritten, one careful movement at a time. She took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the dust that coated everything, a testament to years of undisturbed secrets. With renewed determination, she returned to the lock. This time, her touch was softer, more intuitive, less forceful. She listened intently, her ear almost grazing the cold metal, trying to decipher the whispers of its inner workings. There was a faint give, a subtle shift that hinted at progress. Her pulse quickened, a drumbeat against the silence. It was like feeling her way through a labyrinth in the dark, each step uncertain, each turn potentially leading to a dead end. But she was close. She could feel it in her bones, a deep-seated intuition that had guided her through weeks of patient, meticulous observation. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound broke the stillness. A soft, delicate click. It was barely audible, a mere whisper against the vastness of the night. Yet it resonated through every nerve ending in Eleanor's body. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the lock, half disbelieving, half triumphant. It had yielded. The impossible had just become possible. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, heavy and sudden, threatening to buckle her knees. Yet beneath it, a surge of raw, unadulterated adrenaline pulsed through her veins, chasing away all thoughts of fatigue. Her hands, still trembling, reached for the lid of the iron-bound chest. It felt impossibly heavy, as if resisting its own unveiling. With a slow, deliberate movement, she lifted it. A puff of stale, musty air escaped, carrying the scent of ancient paper and forgotten deeds. The interior of the chest was dimly lit by the lantern, revealing its hidden treasures. There they were, a stack of aged, leather-bound ledgers, their covers worn smooth by time, and a collection of loose letters bound together with faded, brittle ribbons. They looked exactly as she had imagined, the tangible proof of a crime long buried. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet drama unfolding. Her fingers, still tingling from the struggle with the lock, hesitated for a moment, hovering over the documents. It was an instinctual pause, a moment of profound recognition that this was the point of no return. What she held now was not just paper and ink. It was the truth, stark and unvarnished, capable of shattering worlds. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry, and carefully lifted the top ledger. The paper felt brittle and delicate beneath her touch. The ink faded in places, but still shockingly clear. The meticulous handwriting, a hand she did not recognize but immediately associated with cold calculation, filled the pages. She began to read, her eyes scanning the precise columns, the dates, the figures. At first it was a blur of numbers and unfamiliar names, but then a specific entry caught her eye. It was a date, chillingly familiar, the very month and year her father's ruin had begun. Her fingers locked around the edge of the ledger, a white-knuckled grip that threatened to tear the fragile page. The words began to coalesce, forming a narrative of betrayal and deceit. This was no ordinary ledger. It was a meticulous record of illicit transactions, payments made to shadowy figures, and fabricated debts. Her gaze darted to the accompanying letters, carefully untying a faded ribbon. The correspondence detailed the elaborate web of false accusations, the strategic rumors planted, the carefully orchestrated financial traps laid for her father. Each sentence was a hammer blow, striking at the foundations of her grief, transforming it into a burning, righteous fury. A tear, hot and defiant, escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. It was followed by another and then another, until a steady stream flowed freely, blurring the precise lines of the script before her. This was the horror, the sheer, calculated malice of it all. To think that a man, Alaric's own father, could orchestrate such a devastating downfall with such cold, dispassionate precision. Her breath hitched, a ragged sound in the quiet room. She could almost hear her father's voice, his desperate pleas for reason, his confusion as his world crumbled around him. He had been a good man, an honorable man, and he had been systematically dismantled by a ruthless, unseen hand. Grief swelled within her, thick and suffocating, threatening to drown her in its depths. The images of her family's decline flashed before her eyes. The forced sales, the vacant stares of her mother, the shame that had become their constant companion. It had been more than financial ruin. It had been an assault on their very essence, a theft of their dignity. The tears poured, unchecked, a release of years of bottled-up pain and sorrow. She wasn't just reading history, she was reliving it, experiencing the crushing weight of injustice as if it were happening all over again. Her chest ached with the intensity of it, a physical manifestation of her broken heart. But amidst the horror and the grief, another emotion began to rise, slowly but surely, like a phoenix from the ashes. Vindication. It was a cold, hard satisfaction, a steel core forming within her trembling frame. Every doubt she had harbored, every moment of despair she had endured, every whisper that her father might have been at fault, was now obliterated. He was innocent. Her family was innocent. The truth meticulously laid out in these brittle pages screamed their innocence. She picked up another letter, its edges softened by age, and saw a signature that made her stomach clench. Sterling, not Alaric's, but his father's. Bold, arrogant, unapologetic. The man who had worn a mask of respectability while secretly weaving a web of destruction. Eleanor's hands shook with a potent mixture of rage and triumph. This was it. This was the proof she had risked everything for, the final undeniable confirmation of her lifelong belief. The hours melted away as she delved deeper, moving from ledgers to correspondence, cross-referencing dates, identifying key players, tracing the dark threads of the conspiracy. The details were sickeningly precise. Forged documents, corrupt officials, manipulated market prices, all designed to isolate and then crush her father's business and reputation. She saw entries detailing the bribing of witnesses, the silencing of inconvenient truths. It was a masterpiece of malevolence executed with chilling efficiency. Her own story, her forced marriage to Alaric, was a direct consequence of these deeds. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't understood, a lingering casualty of a war fought years ago. But now she held the weapons to turn the tide. The heavy weight of the ledgers felt almost sacred in her hands. Each page was a testament, each word a cry for justice that had waited too long to be heard. The corners of her mouth tightened. The time for sorrow was over. The time for reckoning was fast approaching. The lantern began to flicker, its oil nearly spent, casting long, dancing shadows across the study walls. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness had begun to thin, giving way to the faint, ethereal glow of pre-dawn light filtering through the heavy drapes. Eleanor looked up, her eyes burning, her face streaked with dried tears. She felt utterly drained, physically and emotionally, yet vibrantly alive with a new purpose. The sheer scale of the deception, the depth of the betrayal was almost unfathomable, but it was real, and she had it. She carefully gathered the documents, stacking the ledgers, tying the letters with their faded ribbons. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as if handling fragile glass. This evidence, once hidden, would now be brought into the light. It would expose the truth that had festered in the shadows for so long. She thought of Alaric, handsome and proud, completely unaware of the rotten foundation upon which his family's prestige was built. A strange, complex emotion stirred within her, a fleeting moment of pity quickly swallowed by the cold resolve that now defined her. He would have to face this truth. He would have to live with the legacy of his father's crimes. Her hands still trembled, a persistent physical manifestation of the seismic shift within her soul. The horror of the revelations, the raw ache of rekindled grief, and the fierce, unyielding vindication all swirled together, a tempest in her heart. She held the thick bundle of documents close, their weight grounding her, reminding her of the immense power she now possessed. The silence of the study, which had once been a comfort, now seemed to press in on her, amplifying her every sensation. Then a sound, faint at first, distant, but growing steadily clearer. Footsteps, distinct. They echoed in the long, silent corridor outside the study, approaching with an unnerving rhythm. Eleanor froze, every muscle tensing. Her head snapped toward the door. Alaric! It could only be Alaric. The full horror and vindication washed over her, a potent, dizzying wave, as Alaric's distinct footsteps echoed in the hall outside the study. Alaric's heavy footsteps echoed, a rhythmic thunder growing louder. Eleanor's breath caught. Her hands, trembling from the ledger's revelation, clutched the damning pages. The ink felt cold. Panic flooded her. She had mere seconds. She scrambled, mind racing. The open chest lay before her. No time to lock it. No time to restore the false back. She shoved the ledgers and correspondence inside with a desperate, clumsy motion. The faint rustle of aged paper seemed deafening. The documents were concealed, not properly hidden. She prayed the chest's shadow would hold them for a moment longer. The doorknob turned. Eleanor spun around, her heart hammering. Her eyes were wide, her face flushed with raw terror. She tried to compose herself, but her body felt disconnected. A faint scent of old books, and something uniquely his, reached her. Duke Alaric Sterling stood framed in the doorway, a tall shadow against the dim light. His piercing blue eyes narrowed slightly as they fell upon her. A faint frown touched his brow. He wore a dark velvet smoking jacket. The air in the room seemed to cool around her. She felt his gaze, sharp and interrogating, stripping away her composure. She wanted to run, to vanish into the shadows. "Eleanor?" His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. It held no warmth, only a dangerous question. "What are you doing here?" The words hung in the air, thick and accusatory. Eleanor's mouth felt impossibly dry. She licked her lips, tasting metallic fear. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, something plausible. Her pulse throbbed at her temples, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Her eyes darted around the study, seeking a prop, anything to lend credibility to a lie. I couldn't sleep," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. It sounded thin, unconvincing. She fought to steady it. "I often find solace among the books." She gestured vaguely towards the towering shelves, her hand shaking. She clasped her hands together, forcing them still. She hoped the dim light obscured the tremors. Alaric took a slow step into the room, his gaze fixed on her. His presence filled the space, dominating it. He folded his arms across his chest, a gesture of casual authority that felt like an iron cage. The silence stretched, long and excruciating. She felt her skin prickle under his scrutiny. The faint smell of beeswax and old paper filled her nose. Beneath it, the cold scent of his suspicion. "Solace?" he repeated, the word laced with skepticism. His eyes flickered towards the large desk. Her heart leaped. Had he noticed the chest? Had she left something exposed? Her breath hitched. She fought the urge to glance behind her, to check on the secrets she had tried to hide. Her fingers locked around each other, her knuckles aching. She forced herself to meet his gaze, summoning Vance's pride. Her father's name, her family's ruin, fueled a flicker of defiant strength. She would not break. "Yes, solace," she affirmed, her voice gaining strength, though it felt like sand in her throat. "The vastness of this house, it can be overwhelming. I thought an old volume might offer distraction." She tried to appear weary, vulnerable, but not suspicious. He took another step, his eyes sweeping across the room. His gaze lingered on the empty space near the bookshelf where she had discovered the false back. Her blood ran cold. He couldn't possibly know, she thought wildly, but his eyes seemed to pierce the shadows, probing their depths, making her doubt everything. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions. "You're usually in bed by this hour," Alaric observed, his tone flat, brimming with implication. He tilted his head, watching her. It was a predator's assessment. Eleanor felt a cold shiver. The wooden floors felt cold. The scent of dust seemed stronger now, mixed with a faint metallic tang of her own fear. Eleanor forced a small, fragile smile. It felt entirely false. "Indeed, but tonight, sleep evaded me. The quiet of the house sometimes feels too loud." She tried to sound wistful, a lonely new bride. The lie felt flimsy, a thin veil over a raging fire. She felt a bead of sweat tracing her temple, a traitorous signal in the cool air. His piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into her, searching for a crack in her facade. She could not read his expression, a careful mask of polite inquiry, but felt the weight of his suspicion. It was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak suffocating her. She swallowed hard, her throat raw. The faint sound of the house settling, a creak of timber, seemed to mock her, reminding her of secrets hidden within its bones. "And you chose my father's study?" he asked, his voice low, with an edge she had not heard before. It was not anger, but a cool, analytical probing. The implications of her choice of room were not lost on them. This room remained, for the most part, untouched, a sanctuary of the former Duke's private life. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of panic. This was the weak point in her story. She should have chosen the Grand Library. Her desperation for the ledgers had overridden caution. I I didn't realize," she stammered, hating the weakness in her voice. "I just wandered. It was open. I thought I might find something comforting, a history, a story to lose myself in." She clutched at the idea, hoping to sound earnest. Her fingers, still intertwined, felt cold and numb. Alaric's gaze drifted from her face across the room, then settled for a moment on the iron-bound chest behind the desk. Eleanor's breath caught again. She felt a jolt of terror. She knew with chilling certainty that he had seen it. The lid was not fully closed, a tiny sliver of darkness indicating its contents. She had been too hurried, too careless. Her heart hammered, a frantic rhythm echoing in her ears. The scent of old paper and dust seemed overwhelming, clinging to her. He turned his attention back to her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a new depth, a subtle intensity. A fresh wave of fear went through her. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken accusations. She felt a prickle of unease, a cold dread spreading through her veins. The silence was deafening, a vacuum where words should have been. He took another slow step forward, then another, until he stood barely 5 feet from her. His proximity felt like an invasion. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. Her senses heightened each detail, the rich scent of his cologne, the faint rustle of his velvet jacket, the rise and fall of his chest. She noticed a faint stain on his shirt cuff, an insignificant detail her terrified mind clung to as a desperate distraction. "You seem agitated, Eleanor," Alaric murmured, his voice softer now, deceptively so. It was a velvet glove concealing an iron fist. "Are you quite well?" The unexpected concern almost undid her. It was a familiar trick, a perceived kindness that could disarm a person. But Eleanor knew better. She remembered his hand brushing hers in the library, the confusing jolt. She pushed the memory away. This was not kindness. This was a trap. She forced herself to nod, though her head felt heavy. Just the late hour, perhaps, a chill in the air. She hugged herself, an attempt to appear cold, to justify her presence and agitation. Her fingers dug into her arms, a silent plea for composure. The silence in the room stretched, taut and brittle, like a violin string pulled to breaking point. Alaric simply stood there, watching her, his gaze unwavering. He seemed to be weighing her words, searching for inconsistencies, for telltale signs of a lie. The air grew thick with unspoken thoughts, with the raw energy of two wills colliding. Eleanor felt a knot of dread tighten. She could feel her pulse thrumming in her ears, making it hard to think clearly. She could taste the fear, sharp and acrid. The documents, hidden poorly in the chest, felt like a burning coal behind her, threatening to ignite the room. She imagined him walking past her, reaching for the chest, opening it, finding the truth. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea. Her vision narrowed, focusing only on his piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything. A faint breath escaped her lips, almost a whimper. She quickly pressed her mouth shut, fearing any sound that might betray her. She stood her ground, refusing to cower, refusing eye contact. Her father's memory, her family's honor, the burning injustice all held her upright. This was not just about her, it was about them. Alaric held her gaze for another long, agonizing moment. His expression remained a careful mask, unreadable. But in his eyes she saw a flicker, a tiny, imperceptible spark of suspicion. It was a seed planted, a doubt that had taken root. He knew, or at least suspected, that something was amiss. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Then, without another word, without a change in his expression, Alaric turned. He turned with a fluid, graceful movement, his dark velvet jacket rustling softly. He did not glance back. He simply walked out, leaving Eleanor alone in the heavy silence, the scent of old paper, and the chilling sensation of his suspicion. The door clicked shut, leaving her in the sudden echoing emptiness. The heavy oak door of the study had closed with a soft thud, leaving Eleanor alone in the sudden quiet. The sound echoed in the vast room, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of her own heart. Her fingers still trembled, slightly, remembering the feel of the aged paper and the incriminating words. Alaric's unreadable gaze remained burned into her mind, a silent question she knew she must answer, but not yet. Not like this. She retreated to her chambers, the documents clutched tight in her hand, the leather cool against her skin. Finding a small, hidden drawer beneath her dressing table, she carefully tucked them away. They were too important, too dangerous to leave exposed. Each morning she would reach out and touch the smooth wood of the drawer, a constant reminder of the explosive truth it contained. The weight of the secret felt like a physical burden on her chest, pressing down with every breath she took. Days bled into one another, marked by the slow rhythm of the manor and the ceaseless turning of Eleanor's thoughts. She agonized over the revelation. When would be the right moment? How could she deliver such a devastating blow? The documents in her drawer seemed to hum with an insidious energy, burning a hole in the quiet fabric of her new life. Sleep offered little respite. Her dreams were filled with fragments of her father's face, etched with despair, and then Alaric's, bewildered and betrayed. She found herself observing Alaric with an intensity that surprised even her. Before, he was simply the Duke, her family's enemy, the man whose lineage had destroyed hers. Now, armed with the knowledge of his father's deceit, she saw him through a new, unsettling lens. He was no longer just the proud, self-assured man she had married. He was a man unknowingly living on a foundation of lies, a grand deception that permeated every stone of Sterling Manor. At breakfast, she watched him across the polished mahogany table. He would read the morning papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sometimes he would sigh, a quiet, almost weary sound that seemed out of place for such a formidable figure. She noticed the way his gaze would drift to the distant hills, a faraway look in his piercing blue eyes. What thoughts occupied him then? Was it the weight of his duties, or something else she could not fathom? One afternoon, she walked through the sprawling gardens, the air crisp and carrying the scent of damp earth. She saw Alaric speaking with one of the stable hands, a young boy with wish-eyed, anxious eyes. Alaric knelt, not a hint of condescension in his posture, and patiently explained something about a horse's bridle. He even offered a small, encouraging smile when the boy nodded in understanding. This small act of kindness was a jolt, a dissonance in the image she held of him. Later, during one of their silent dinners, Alaric spoke of his father, the late Duke. He mentioned his sternness, yes, but also his unwavering dedication to the estate, his vision for its future. My father worked tirelessly, Alaric said, his voice softer than usual. He believed in leaving a legacy, a name untarnished. A deep sadness touched his eyes as he spoke, a genuine reverence for the man Eleanor knew to be a cruel architect of ruin. A flicker of unexpected pity stirred within Eleanor. It was a cold, unwelcome sensation, battling against the fierce, burning resolve that had sustained her for so long. How could she feel anything but contempt for him? Yet seeing the sincere pride and affection in his eyes as he spoke of his father, she recognized the depth of the betrayal he was about to face. His world, built on what he believed was honor, would shatter into a million pieces. She found herself gripping the silverware beneath the table, her knuckles white. No, this was not about pity. This was about justice. This was about her father, a man of true honor, whose name had been dragged through the mud. This was about her mother's quiet sorrow, the shadowed halls of Vance Estate, the dignity that had been stolen from her family. Alaric's pain, however genuine, could not eclipse the years of suffering her own family had endured. The pity was a fleeting weakness, a dangerous distraction. She pushed it back, deep inside. Her resolve hardened once more, becoming a cold, unyielding steel. The memory of her father's last letter, his plea for her to clear his name, echoed in her mind, silencing any nascent sympathy. She had a sacred duty, and no unexpected softness could deter her from it. The documents hidden in her drawer pulsed with the truth she was sworn to unleash. She spent hours in the library, not reading, but staring at the vast collection of books. Each tome seemed to whisper of secrets, of forgotten histories. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. She ran her hand along the spines, her thoughts a whirlwind. The decision was not if, but how. How to ensure the truth would land with the force it deserved, undeniable and utterly devastating. She needed an audience, a setting that would amplify the shock, making retreat impossible. She needed to expose the truth not in a quiet corner, but under the harsh glare of social scrutiny. The notion of a private confrontation, while perhaps kinder to Alaric, would leave room for denial, for suppression. Her family's honor demanded a public reckoning. It demanded that his world be undone before the eyes of society. The idea of a formal dinner began to solidify in her mind. Sterling Manor often hosted such events, gatherings of the elite, all eager to observe the new Duchess. The long dining table, laden with crystal and silver, would become an altar of truth. The polite chatter, the clinking of glasses, the facade of normalcy, all would be shattered by her revelation. It was a cruel choice, she knew, but necessary. Her heart hammered against her ribs at the thought. She pictured the scene, the startled faces, the sudden silence, Alaric's reaction. A cold sweat broke out on her skin, despite the warmth of the roaring fire in the hearth. She was not a cruel woman, but she was a determined one. This was not about vengeance for its own sake. It was about restoration, about setting right a terrible wrong. She observed the preparations for the next formal dinner with a meticulous eye. The servants moved with quiet efficiency, polishing silverware, arranging flowers. Mrs. Finch, ever observant, offered a rare, small smile. Eleanor returned it, a fragile mask over her turmoil. Each detail, each polished surface, each flickering candle contributed to the stage she was about to set. The evening arrived, draped in velvet in the soft glow of chandeliers. Eleanor dressed with unusual care, choosing a gown of deep emerald green that brought out the intensity in her dark eyes. As she gazed at her reflection, she saw not just herself, but generations of Vances, their silent expectations reflected in her steady gaze. Tonight she would speak for them all. She walked down the grand staircase, her hand gliding along the smooth coal banister. Each step was deliberate, carrying her closer to the moment of truth. The murmur of voices from the drawing room reached her ears, a prelude to the storm she was about to unleash. The scent of roasted meat and fine wine mingled in the air, a final offering before the bitter taste of reality. Alaric stood by the fireplace, conversing with a local dignitary, his profile sharp and composed. He looked up as she descended, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he offered a polite nod. He was still unaware, still steeped in his inherited certainty. Eleanor met his gaze, her own unwavering, a silent promise hovering between them. She felt the weight of her decision heavy on her soul, a chilling certainty that there was no turning back. The documents, safely tucked away in her private chambers, awaited their moment. Tonight, under the guise of an ordinary formal dinner, the Sterling legacy would begin to unravel. The time had come. The grand dining hall of Sterling Manor usually held a stifling quiet, a heavy silence broken only by the polite murmur of conversation and the gentle clinking of silver against porcelain. Tonight, however, an unseen tension wound itself through the opulent space, tightening with each passing moment. Candles flickered in their ornate holders, casting dancing shadows across the damask tablecloth, and the faces gathered around the polished mahogany table. The rich aroma of roasted pheasant and fine wine filled the air, a stark contrast to the bitter truth Eleanor was about to unleash. She watched Alaric from across the table, his profile sharp and commanding as he conversed with a visiting dignitary. His laughter, a deep, resonant sound, seemed to reverberate through her very bones, a cruel echo of the peace he was about to lose. Her own plate remained largely untouched, the elaborate meal a tasteless formality. Her hands resting calmly in her lap hid the slight tremor that had begun hours ago, a frantic drumbeat beneath her skin. Every breath felt carefully measured, a battle against the rising tide of her own anxiety and the fierce resolve that propelled her forward. The faces of her family, pale and suffering in her memory, spurred her on. Eleanor waited for a lull in the conversation, for the moment when attention would naturally shift, however briefly, to the head of the table. She felt the weight of the aged ledger and its accompanying letters, hidden beneath her silk napkin, a silent, damning presence. The old paper had a faint, musty scent, a smell that now clung to her memory, mingled with the metallic tang of old grief. She inhaled slowly, her gaze sweeping over the polished wood, the gleam of the crystal decanters, the hushed faces of the other guests. Their polite smiles and shallow pleasantries were about to crumble. Then the moment arrived, a pause, a collective intake of breath after a particularly lengthy anecdote from a baron about his hunting escapades. All eyes, including Alaric's, turned towards her, a curious, expectant flicker in his blue depths. He offered a small, polite smile, a gesture of conjugal duty more than genuine warmth. It was now. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within its cage. She slid her hand beneath the napkin, her fingers closing around the worn leather of the ledger. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, Eleanor lifted the stack of documents. The soft rustle of the old paper was surprisingly loud in the suddenly hushed room. She placed them, not gently, but with a firm, almost definitive thud, directly in front of Alaric's plate. The ledger lay open, revealing a page filled with the meticulous, damning script, an undeniable accusation laid bare for him to see. Her gaze met his, unwavering, a quiet storm brewing behind her dark eyes. Alaric's smile faltered, then vanished. His eyes, usually so confident and piercing, widened almost imperceptibly, a fleeting moment of confusion crossing his features. He glanced down at the documents, then back at Eleanor, a question forming on his lips. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken curiosity and a rapidly escalating dread. The other guests, sensing the shift, fell silent, their forks hovering midair, their gazes darting nervously between husband and wife. The faint scent of melting beeswax from the candles seemed to intensify, a sweet, sickly perfume. "What is this, Eleanor?" Alaric's voice was low, a controlled murmur, but a dangerous edge lurked beneath the surface. He did not touch the documents, as if they might burn him. His hand, which had been resting casually on the table, tightened into a fist, his knuckles turning white, his jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously. He looked at her as if she had suddenly produced a venomous snake at the dinner table. Eleanor maintained her composure, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the thick silence. "It is the truth, Alaric, a truth long buried, now unearthed." Each word was a calculated strike, delivered with precision. She watched his face, observing the subtle tremors of his composure beginning to crack. His eyes scanned the open page before him, tracing lines of text, though she knew he couldn't possibly comprehend the full weight of it in a single glance. A flicker of fury ignited in his eyes, chasing away the confusion. "The truth?" he scoffed, his voice rising slightly, startling some of the guests. "You bring some aged papers to our dinner table and declare them the truth? What game is this, Eleanor? Some elaborate jest?" He pushed his chair back slightly, a sharp scrape against the polished floor. The pleasant facade of the evening was shattering. Eleanor did not flinch. "No game, Alaric," she replied, her voice remaining calm, a stark contrast to his burgeoning anger. "This is a record, a ledger documenting the transactions, the bribes, the forged signatures, the correspondence outlining the scheme that ruined my family, orchestrated by your father." She kept her voice even, almost detached, though inside, a maelstrom of emotion raged. The years of pain, the shame, the quiet dignity of her father all coalesced into this single potent moment. His face contorted, a mask of disbelief and rage. "My father?" he bellowed, his voice now ringing through the hall, making the crystal glasses vibrate. Several guests gasped, some looking down at their plates, others simply staring, frozen in shock. "How dare you speak such slander? My father was a man of honor, a respected figure. You accuse him of forgery? Of bribery? This is an outrageous lie, a malicious fabrication." He pushed himself away from the table, rising to his full height. He loomed over the documents, his shadow falling across them like a dark omen. Eleanor met his furious gaze, her own eyes holding a depth of sorrow and unwavering certainty. The evidence is there, Alaric, in your own family's meticulous hand. Proof of how Lord Vance, my father, was framed, stripped of his lands, his title, his honor, and all to enrich the sterling estate. She gestured subtly towards the ledger, inviting him to truly see. She knew the pages held too much detail, too many dates and names for him to simply dismiss them as vague accusations. Preposterous, he roared, slamming his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. The sound echoed like a gunshot. This is some desperate attempt to salvage your family's tarnished name. A pathetic forgery concocted by you, or perhaps some desperate loyalist to your disgraced house. His breath came in short, angry bursts. He could not accept it. The sheer weight of her words, the implication that his entire foundation was built on deceit, was too much for him to bear. His world was tilting on its axis, and he fought against it with every ounce of his ingrained arrogance. Eleanor watched him, a profound sadness mingling with her grim satisfaction. He looked utterly undone, though he tried to mask it with bluster. This was not the arrogant duke she had married, but a man confronted with a shattering betrayal. Do you truly believe I would risk everything for a pathetic forgery? She asked, her voice quiet but piercing. Look closely, Alaric. The handwriting, the official seals, the details of the transactions. They match. She knew he recognized his father's hand, the precise, elegant script that had graced countless family documents. The evidence was not just written words. It was a ghost from his own past, speaking from the page. His eyes narrowed to icy slits, scanning the documents with a desperate intensity, as if searching for a flaw, a single inconsistency that would discredit her. His mind raced, grasping for any explanation other than the horrifying truth. The sheer audacity of her act, presenting such claims in front of their guests at his own table, fueled his outrage. He felt a burning shame, a public humiliation he could not tolerate. He was Duke Sterling, a man of unblemished lineage, and she dared to suggest otherwise. This is an insult to my family, to my father's memory, Alaric hissed, leaning over the table, his face inches from hers. The heat of his anger radiated off him. You will retract these baseless accusations, Eleanor. Now, or you will regret the day you ever conceived of such a malicious plot. His voice was low, dangerous, a direct threat. He believed she was trying to manipulate him, to seize power, to destroy him. He could not yet fathom the depth of her personal pain, her decades of suffering. Eleanor's gaze remained steady, unwavering beneath his furious stare. The scent of fear, faint and metallic, seemed to rise from him, though he would never admit it. There is nothing to retract, Alaric, she stated, her voice as calm as a still lake. The evidence is irrefutable. It speaks for itself. She was not asking him to believe her. She was presenting facts, cold, hard, and undeniable. Her resolve had been forged in the fires of injustice, and it would not bend. He scoffed, a short, bitter sound. Evidence? A pile of old papers you conveniently found? His eyes darted around the room, meeting the shocked, curious stares of his guests. The humiliation burned him, making him lash out blindly. He reached for the ledger with a violent, swift motion, his fingers closing around the worn leather. His intent was clear, unmistakable. He would tear them, shred them, destroy them, and with them, he hoped, her words and this unbearable truth. As Alaric began to pull the documents towards him, intending to rip them apart, Eleanor's voice cut through the air, clear and resonant, halting his hand midair. These documents contain not only signed confessions, Alaric, but also precise details of how my father's ruin benefited your family directly, down to the last shilling. They hold your father's personal seal on letters detailing the conspiracy and the names of every accomplice. You cannot simply destroy the truth. The air in the grand dining room seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of Eleanor's words. Alaric's hand, poised to rip the aged paper, froze. His eyes, usually sharp and dismissive, scanned the meticulous script, then darted to Eleanor's calm, unyielding face. A tremor ran through him, darting from his jaw and descending through his rigid shoulders. He did not tear the documents. Instead, he snatched them from the polished table, the faint rustle of the old pages, a stark sound in the sudden quiet. Without a word, without a backward glance, he pushed his chair back with a harsh scrape against the marble floor. His footsteps echoed, quick and uneven, down the long corridor, the sound growing fainter until a distant door slammed shut, reverberating through the manor's deep silence. Eleanor remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the warmth of the untouched dinner cooling on the plates before her. The metallic tang of cold cutlery seemed to mock the emptiness that had settled in the room. This was it. The moment she had lived for, plotted for, sacrificed for, had finally arrived. A strange, hollow triumph began to spread through her, tasting like ash on her tongue. The rage that had fueled her for so long, the burning desire for vindication, had not vanished, but it had morphed into something far more intricate and unsettling. She listened to the silence, absolute and profound, stretching out from Alaric's private study. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked with an almost oppressive rhythm, marking the slow passage of time. Each second felt like an hour, each minute an eternity. Her heart beat a slow, heavy drum against her ribs, a counterpoint to the distant ticking. She had envisioned this moment countless times, rehearsed it in her mind with fierce satisfaction. Now the reality was not the explosion of fury she had anticipated, but this chilling quiet, the sound of a world imploding in hushed tones. Eleanor rose from her chair, her movements stiff, as if her own body had absorbed the tension of the room. She walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy velvet curtain. The night outside was black and vast, dotted with an indifferent scattering of stars. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, a pale, determined face staring back. Was this the face of victory? It felt more like the face of exhaustion, etched with the weariness of a long, lonely battle. Her eyes, usually dark and unwavering, held a flicker of something she could not quite name. It was not regret, not exactly. It was more akin to a profound sorrow, a recognition of the terrible cost of truth. She imagined Alaric in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his father's lies. He would be reading, she knew, every word meticulously, every forged signature, every cruel accusation that had systematically dismantled her family's good name. The thought brought a sharp pang to her chest. He was not the architect of the betrayal, merely its unsuspecting inheritor. Her vengeance was against a legacy, not entirely against the man himself. This distinction, once clear and sharp, had blurred with the quiet moments they had shared. The unexpected kindnesses, the glances across a crowded room that had hinted at an unspoken connection. Hours crawled by. The servants, sensing the monumental shift in the manor's atmosphere, moved like phantoms, their footsteps barely audible. Mrs. Finch brought her a cup of chamomile tea, her kind eyes full of a silent, knowing sympathy. Eleanor took the cup, her fingers locking around the warm porcelain. She knew if she let go, she might spill it, just as her carefully constructed composure might shatter. The tea was fragrant, but she tasted nothing. Every sense was attuned to the silence, to the heavy air vibrating with unspoken truths. She paced the drawing room, then the library, avoiding the dining hall where the fragments of their confrontation still lay. The grand portraits on the walls seemed to watch her, their painted eyes holding centuries of sterling history, now tainted by the raw, ugly truth. She wondered if they, too, felt the tremor in the manor's foundations. The old wood of the floors groaned under her weight, a subtle symphony of ancient protest. A single lamp burned in a far corner, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the certainty she had once felt. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to escape the suffocating weight of the manor. But she could not. She had to see it through, had to witness the full impact of her revelation. Her justice demanded it. Yet a part of her, a newly awakened, tender part, dreaded the moment. She remembered the warmth of Alaric's hand brushing hers in the library, the unexpected jolt of it, and a shiver ran through her. How could such a connection exist amidst such deception and pain? The moon climbed higher, casting silver stripes through the tall windows. The last flicker of doubt, long buried under years of grief and anger, resurfaced. Had she done the right thing? There was no turning back now. The words had been spoken, the evidence laid bare. The old ledger, her father's vindication, was now Alaric's burden. The scent of aged paper, a faint, musty aroma, seemed to cling to her, a phantom reminder of the documents. She closed her eyes, picturing Alaric's face as he read, the slow dawning of understanding, the inevitable collapse of his entire world. Her vengeance felt less sweet now, more like a bitter medicine, necessary but unpleasant. She had sought to shatter his world, and now, standing on the precipice of its destruction, she felt a strange, unsettling empathy. He was, in his own way, a victim too, albeit one cloaked in privilege and ignorance. She returned to the foyer, sitting on a high-backed chair, her gaze fixed on the study door. The ornate carvings on the door seemed to writhe in the dim light. She imagined the furious turning of pages, the disbelief turning to cold, hard acceptance. The man she had married, the man she had sworn to destroy, was now alone with the ruins of his family's honor. The silence deepened, pressing in on her, almost a physical weight. Then a sound, a faint creak, the soft click of a lock. Her breath hitched in her throat. Every nerve ending in her body snapped to attention. The study door opened slowly, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim light of the interior. Alaric stepped out, his posture completely changed. The proud, imposing figure she had known was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to have aged a decade in a few short hours. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed slightly, and his usually impeccable clothes appeared disheveled, as if he had been wrestling with an invisible force. He moved with a heavy, uncertain gait, his footsteps now dragging across the polished floor. The arrogance that had been his constant companion, the self-assured demeanor that had defined him, had utterly vanished. His face was starkly pale, his features drawn and etched with a profound exhaustion. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that often conveyed dismissiveness, were hollow, shadowed, and glazed over with a deep, crushing pain. They looked as if they had witnessed something unspeakable, something that had irrevocably altered his very being. He stopped in the middle of the foyer, directly beneath the grand chandelier, which cast a weak, golden glow on his ravaged face. His gaze, slow and unfocused, eventually found Eleanor, who had risen from her chair, her own face a mask of complex emotions. The air between them crackled with an unspoken history, with the raw, exposed nerves of two people irrevocably bound by a terrible truth. His lips parted, a dry, faint sound escaping. His voice, usually commanding and resonant, was barely a whisper, thin and fragile, utterly stripped of its usual power. "Oui?" he asked, his eyes holding a mixture of betrayal, shame, and a nascent understanding that twisted in the depths of their hollowed-out expression. Alaric's whisper, sharp and raw, tore through the silence of the great hall. "Oui, Mom." Eleanor met his gaze. His whispered question felt like a blade, but she held steady. Her voice, soft yet weighted, explained, "My father was a man of honor, Alaric. His name, his legacy was destroyed by yours." She watched disbelief, then horror flicker across his face, but she did not falter. "My family, the Vances, were shamed, stripped of everything. We were left with whispers of treachery, a forgotten truth." His handsome face contorted with a pain not hers, yet an ache stirred in her chest. She had wanted this shattering of his world. Now, a part of her mourned the man she knew, even as vindication settled within her. "I married you for one reason," she continued, her voice stronger. "To find what your father hid, to unearth the proof to clear my father's name." Her usually veiled eyes now shone with fierce light. She saw his hands clench, his jaw tighten, trying to hold his shattered reality together. Exhaustion washed over her, her quest's burden heavy. She took a slow breath. It was not a choice made lightly. My heart was heavy with grief, needing to reclaim what was stolen. She paused. His expression shifted from bewildered rage to unsettling shame. She looked away from the documents, at him speaking the unspoken. But then there were complexities. The confession felt like fire on her tongue, betraying a hidden part of her. She remembered his unexpected kindness, his eyes catching hers, the jolt of his hand brushing hers, unsettling her careful walls. "This marriage," she admitted softer, "it was not merely a means to an end. It became something else." Her gaze, vulnerable, met his. I saw in you a man who believed in honor, who loved his father even if misplaced. A man, in his own way, as much a victim of his father's deceit as my family. His face, etched with agony, showed he understood. Alaric moved, one slow step, then another. Documents lay scattered. He reached for the ledger, fingers tracing the forged script. He remembered his father's lectures on duty, the sterling name, all of it, a cruel lie built on ruins. A shuddering breath escaped him. His eyes, once arrogant, were now shadowed with sorrow. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, stripped of pride. My father, he began, hoarse. I believed in him. I defended him. He shook his head. A single tear traced his cheek, clenching Eleanor's stomach. It was for the man he thought his father was, for betrayed ideals. All these years, he murmured, I built my life on lies. No anger, only devastated clarity. The weight of the tarnished, sterling name pressed on him. He reached for her hand, hesitant, almost reverent. Eleanor did not pull away. His usually confident fingers trembled as they closed around hers. A silent, charged current passed between them. Not love, not yet, but a profound connection. Forged in deceit and discovery, it was the understanding of two souls who had walked through hell, finding each other in the ashes. There must be justice, Alaric said, gaining resolve. Arrogance gone, steely determination replaced it. Not just for your father, Eleanor, but for mine, for the truth. He looked at their clasped hands, then at her. I will make this right. His eyes held a new depth, an earnestness mirroring her need for honor. He understood the profound weight of his words. The public, the court, the world that condemned your family. He continued, his grip firming. They will know the truth. I will ensure it. His head lifted, shoulders straightening. Not with pride, but a new strength born of humility. Every wrong, every accusation, every false testimony, it will be undone. He did not flinch from dismantling his family's fabricated legacy. He accepted it fully. A single tear escaped Eleanor's eye, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming release. The solitary burden of vengeance she had carried now felt shared. She looked at his face, stripped of superficial charm, revealing the genuine man beneath. Etched with pain, yes, but also a dawning purpose. This was not the Duke Alaric she married. This was a man transformed, reborn in truth. Their marriage, once a strategic alliance for justice and his unwitting complicity, now shifted. No longer a battleground, it was a fragile partnership. Its foundation was not secrecy, but raw, painful understanding. They were two individuals, bound by a difficult pain, facing an uncertain future hand in hand. The hall, once heavy with accusations, now hummed with the quiet intensity of their shared task. They stood together, gaslight casting long shadows. His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand, a comforting gesture speaking volumes. A silent promise, a fragile unity born from wreckage. The journey ahead would be long, fraught with scrutiny and heartache, but they would face it together. Eleanor looked at Alaric, truly seeing him. Not the adversary she vowed to destroy, but the humbled, steadfast man beside her. His eyes, still shamed, now held a glimmer of respect, perhaps hesitant hope. Their hands remained clasped, a symbol of shared destiny, a quiet testament to truth.